Very warm welcome to the Lockdown LitFest. I'm here with Stephen Morris, author of Black Tea, which just an hour ago was shortlisted by the Royal Society of Literature for their Christopher Bland Prize, which is awarded annually to the author of a work of fiction or non-fiction over the age of 50. Stephen studied painting at the Royal Academy of Art, played cello with the Parma Symphony Orchestra, and was a labourer in a foundry and in building sites across London. Now, at the age of 56, he's written his first book, Black Tea, an extraordinary blend of travelogue, personal and family memoir, and a chronicle of the changing geography, politics, and personality of Russia over 40 years. It's published by a small and beautifully formed independent, Claret Press, and it's just been shortlisted for this highly prestigious award. Biographer and broadcaster Andrew Lycett, one of the judges of the Christopher Bland Prize, said about Black Tea that it manages to say something new and worthwhile about that riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma that is Russia. Many have tried this before, but Morris, with his idiosyncratic range of family relationships, triumphantly blends that often elusive trio of personal recollection, history, and sense of place. Stephen Morris, what brought you to this point?
Well, it's a rather strange place to be, suddenly to be given this wonderful honour, and so it's a bit disorientating, really. I mean, especially with this particular prize, which is a first book published for if you're over 50. It almost forces you to look back at your entire life up so far, so to speak, and somehow judge it or qualify it or whatever it is, and that's quite daunting. I mean, it's not how one sets out, but you know, it seems to be how it's sort of turned out. So the book is quite an autobiographical book, so it covers a lot of stuff. It misses out a lot of stuff too. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have these kind words said about it. It really is.
When you say it covers a lot of stuff and it misses a lot of stuff out too, that's intriguing. Does your writing help you make sense of your life, make sense of your relationships? There's a sense of you struggling to make order out of chaos in this book.
I think you're probably right. I think that you know, I found that when it came to writing, I didn't have any plan. I just sort of plunged ahead, and I've been had lots of sort of false starts and botched attempts at writing something which I might be pleased with. But in the end, you don't. I found that I didn't know really what it was about until afterwards, and then you're forced in a way to be, your publisher or your agent says, well, what's this book about? And you think, well, Christ, I don't know what it's about, and you start to sort of work backwards and try to come up with some answers. But it's a strange backwards thing when you try to work out what it's about. Why, for instance, I left out lots of parts of my life, and some characters were left out and some were concentrated on. But I think in the end, it's to do with the theme. It's a theme. One has to have a sort of theme to a book, and whatever doesn't fit that theme just gets left out. And if it doesn't, then there's no focus. So it's to do with a sort of focus, really.
It is indeed very difficult to characterize what this book is, isn't it? It beautifully, felicitously defies characterization in so many ways. I mean, it is a travelogue, it is a political commentary, a historical commentary, it's a personal memoir. Were there precedents for how you structured this, for the form of this? Or did you feel that you were inventing something new as you went along?
Well, I'm not sure about precedents, but I'm always looking for writing which will inspire me, and it's quite rare to find something. I mean, apart from all the stuff which one has read, in the past, the sort of there's also one's always looking for new stuff, and sometimes a book will turn up a newly published book will turn up, and very rarely it might turn up, and you see, well, I can see how what I want to write and how I write it can be done, because they've already sort of, as it were, done it. And so there have been a number of books along the way which have helped me to feel, I suppose, a bit confident, or I can do that, or something like that. But in the end, I think that we're talking about the defining the book, etc. Was a travel book, or it's about Russia, or I think all these things are probably true, except that in the end, really, it's I would say it's a sort of without sounding too pompous or something, it's a sort of a voyage of discovery, really, self-discovery, and that's really how I see it.
One of the striking aspects of your voyage of self-discovery is the way you describe a sort of rebellion against certainty and rebellion against the unwarranted certainties entertained by other people that often actually betoken a kind of violence. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, and I put that in quite early on in the book, and it was a reaction to a disguised reaction to the normal reaction of many people when they are confronted with a situation where they have to or they have to come up with some idea of commentary on a political situation, which perhaps they don't know an awful lot about, but nevertheless it stirs up strong emotions. And it's interesting that the facts on the ground often are secondary to these emotions, which people suddenly find stirred up inside them, and they're, I think, often quite negative emotions, which are very well disguised, and they end up, typically unsophisticatedly in xenophobia, but in a more sophisticated way. There's a kind of a sort of patronization of other cultures, other countries, which I find very off-putting. And I think that beneath that sort of patronization, as it were, is a strange violence and anger, which is trying to come out, and does come out, but in a disguised form. So that's what I was, as it were, reacting against. It was one of the underlying, I don't know quite how to put it, but one of the sort of themes which I didn't actually concretely lay out, but it was what I thought about as I wrote.
It comes through very, very strikingly. You had a very early fascination with Russia. Let's look back. You're 10 years old. It's 1974. Nixon is in the White House. Brezhnev is in the Kremlin. Your father, a socialist campaigner for nuclear disarmament, has been buying you toys and books from the Russian shop in Hoban. You acquire an American military map of the Soviet Union. You have your school textbooks. You have, this is also the height of Cold War paranoia. And then your love affair with Russia really takes off when you fall in love with a Russian woman, Luba, who is your wife, and the mother of your 4 children. Why Russia?
Well, I think that it's rather interesting that in the early stages, I don't know. I think my father, he never explicitly said, and perhaps there was some sort of connection with Russia which he never really explained. Perhaps he didn't understand it himself. But I do remember some very strange things from way back. These Russian presents which we used to get at Christmas time, and I even been thinking about it some more. And once he sort of dressed up as Father Christmas and said, so we were supposed not to know who he was, and then he said in a sort of fake Russian accent, "We are going to have a Russian Christmas." And I thought, what? I remember that, and it didn't seem strange at the time, but now it seems absolutely sort of bizarre. So that was something which was strange, which I wanted to look at. But also going through early adolescence, from sort of self-awareness at age 10 onwards. Quite apart from the fact that my father was involved in in activist pacifism specifically to do with nuclear weapons. Apart from that, there was a sense, I think a lot of people felt a real sort of worry, especially if you were young. I think perhaps everybody did this to a certain extent, of a nuclear sort of holocaust. And there was a kind of a strange dark cloud which was over everybody, in the West. Perhaps it was different for people in Russia, but certainly in the West, we were terrified that, and after the Cuban crisis and et cetera, so there was a sort of real reason to be worried. And for a child, those, I remember having rather sort of awful nightmares, which was specifically related to some catastrophic event, a sort of nuclear thing going off. And so in those terms, Russia was always there as some sort of scary other place. So even when I didn't really know anything about it, it was there. And then, of course, one had all those things like the Olympic Games, where they always used to do so wonderfully well, and Olga Korbut, and then those strange sort of poisonings and assassinations, and then equally strange shiny Moscovich cars for sale. So Russia was always sort of there in a weird way, and I wanted to pick up on that early understanding of what Russia was, sort of slightly sort of naive, childish. Then, of course, I met Luba at a party, and that was completely coincidental, really. I mean, it was just purely. I didn't sort of go looking for a Russian woman. I just happened to meet her at a party in Shepherd's Bush. So that was just a coincidence, I suppose. But you never know. I mean, these things are perhaps not quite so coincidental as you think.
Well, yeah, there's another extraordinary coincidence. I'm not going to commit a spoiler here, but that comes late in the book that reveals that your love for fascination for Russia may have been determined from when you were in the womb. So, and you do.
I know that's very strange. It's very strange.
You deal very interestingly with the mystery of coincidence. In this book. The second half of your book is a sort of road movie. I mean, you cover Russia from the Caucasus to the Crimea. A lot of your descriptions of scenes of, say, you were camping on the roadside, and this turned out to be a young lover's nest where in the morning you discovered loads of used condoms, and there are lots of descriptions of your travels in Russia that are really rather grim. And you also describe it a country where often people don't like each other and people don't trust each other. Is it a grim fascination with Russia? Do you love Russia? Do you love Russians? Is it possible to generalize about nationalities and national characteristics?
Well, I think I tried not to generalize about national characteristics. I always shied away from that. And I suppose there was a certain grimness, especially in the early, just post-communist days, which was a result of huge amounts of concrete being used, and just the sort of the environment was a little bit grim. But I never really. I always found that rather beautiful, and so that for me was a positive thing, and it was also a strangely new thing for somebody who'd been brought up in London and the home counties. So it felt slightly like going to a sort of different planet. And I didn't, when I was writing it, I certainly wasn't trying to find something gruesome or grim, but possibly, it has turned out a bit like that. I know there are some rather violent episodes in Chechnya and stuff, and there's also a sort of sadness which is just a natural sadness which comes out of when things are destroyed and destruction is natural when you have change, and there's been so much very swift change over the last 20 years or whatever. I mean, it's slowed down now, but there was a sudden, huge acceleration of change, and that is, obviously sad, because a lot of things, real physical things, are just simply not there anymore. They've been smashed up, taken down. People have left. Lives have changed. So, in a sense, there's a certain sadness there too, I think.
Yeah. Forgive me, I've just lost my thread.
No, it's fine.
Yes, what do you make of contemporary Russia now, and of our relations, the West's relations with Russia?
Well, I think it's sadly, it's just more of the same. It's inevitable in a sense, because when one sort of says Russia, in a sense, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, what does it mean? You have to ask yourself what it means. But the trouble is, when we talk about it, i.e., when there's certain books written about it, or people write about it in newspapers, they tend to focus on this kind of slightly sort of mad differences in politics or political styles, and so you have these huge entities which are become very simplified, like Russia or China or America, and it's like a little game of Monopoly or something, or Ludo, or some sort of family game which you play, which has a few things which we can talk about and criticize, and that's so far from reality that I think that is really the problem which we come up with because of this, the nature of having to talk about something and then not be able to talk about it any more than some sort of rather superficial political happenings. So in other words, it's nothing's changed. From being a kind of Cold War pariah, fearful enemy, it's now well, I mean, we all know what it is. It's just, it's a different set of problems, but I don't think that they're often very,
Steve, what advice do you have for other authors over the age of 50 who might be eligible for the Christopher Brand Prize? Would you recommend taking this up?
Send your book in, I suppose. I mean, it's odd. It's odd, really. I mean, because there might be some exceptions, but I imagine that most people over the age of 50 who write and write a book which they might send into the Christopher Brand Prize will have written other stuff before. I mean, it's usually quite a sort of a fraught journey. So yeah, I mean, it's come as a bit of a surprise, really. It's rather a nice surprise, especially when people write nice things about it and they say nice things about it. It's odd, but I would say also, I was for so long have been quite happy to be an outsider. Well, not happy to be an outsider. I have been unhappy to be an outsider, but I've come to terms with being an outsider, and I think it's important, perhaps not to feel that one has to chase prizes, or it's wonderful or wonderful to get shortlisted for a prize or whatever it is. But I think it's quite important to come to terms with whatever you are, whatever you're doing, and whatever state your writing might be in. And so, even if one doesn't get the wonderful awards, etc., it's one shouldn't let that put one's off. You see what I mean?
Stephen, thank you very much. Thanks for this insight into your work and into this extraordinary debut book, which I highly recommend to all our viewers. Go to the Claret Press website and buy it and savor it. Do also visit lockdownlitfest.com, where we have feasts, a feast full of many other authors that you can savor, as well as on top of this lunchtime nugget that we've had with Stephen Morris. And as ever, we shall sign off with an injunction to take care, to stay alert, to look after one another. This is a time when we need solidarity on the grand and the small scale. So from Stephen Morris and from me, Palash Davé of the Lockdown Lit Fest, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.